Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. We're going to go on, and now it's time for our keynote speaker, Professor François Taddei from University of Paris. I thank him very much for his very new presentation because it's inverted an interactive format, and it will be moderated by David Pontalier, and I suggest that David starts to introduce François and the way we are going to use for this presentation.
Thank you, Sylvie. Good morning, everyone. Professor François Taddei is the director and the co-founder of the CRI. The CRI is a center for research and interdisciplinarity based in Paris. The CRI is co-constructing and sharing new ways of learning, teaching, conducting research, and mobilizing collective intelligence in the field of life, learning, and digital science in order to address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. François Taddei also published the book Learning in the 21st Century, where he makes a case for revolution in knowledge, and wrote several reports for the French government about how to create a learning society. Hello, François.
Hi.
It's very nice to be here with you today. So first, I would like to go back to the title of the symposium, Disruptive Learning Pathway. So the CRI is probably one of the most disruptive places in France today in education. So could you tell us a bit more about what is the CRI and how do you try to find or invent disruptive learning pathway?
So the CRI was started 15 years ago to empower students and enable them to do things that are not done easily in the French university system. And progressively, we've created new undergrad program, master program, PhD program, and even programs for kindergarten all the way to high school and lifelong learning. We have no program for teachers. But the common points of all those programs is we help learners face their challenges. And today there is ever more challenges. And yet, the classical curricula are most often putting the learners in competition with one another, working on topics that were typically decided by others, not by themselves, and topics that are centered on yesterday's knowledge. And so what we do systematically is we start by inviting students not to compete, but to cooperate, not to work on yesterday's knowledge, but on today's challenges, and not to work on something that we force them to work on, but on something that we invite them to choose among the many challenges that the world has. And so this means we have to redesign the whole curricula. And we've done this systematically and with enough success that it grew exponentially. And we've doubled in size every 18 months. And indeed, now we are working to go much beyond the walls of our place, because the physical space cannot grow exponentially forever. So we partner with UNESCO and hundreds of organizations to build what we call a learning planet and invite all those that want to share the new ways to learn, to face challenges, to do this. So the CRI has a new acronym now. It's a Challenge Research Institute. And so that's really what we are aiming at. And we are aiming to work with all those that believe that to face the many challenges the world has, we have to work on and build on collective intelligence so that everyone can benefit from collective intelligence and contribute to collective intelligence. But we are very aware of collective stupidity as well. And so we have to be very careful, because indeed technology at the moment is, some technologies like social networks are enhancing collective stupidity. And so we have to be really aware of those challenges.
Thank you. And in the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic, how does the CRI do adapt? Because the CRI is all about collective intelligence, but is it closed now? How does it adapt to the context?
So the basically what we did is first, I'm a biologist, a specialist of evolution of microbes and host pathogens interaction. So when I saw the COVID appearing in China, I was in touch with my colleagues there, and so we knew that they had to close universities.
François, your mic is mute. You got mute. Please reactivate it.
Okay. So,
yes,
sometimes
okay.
technology, maybe there is a new algorithm that censor what I had to say, but I didn't touch anything. So anyway, that's talking about technology is not always helpful. We have to be aware of it. And so, we started to reflect on this very early on, because as a biologist, an evolutionary biologist, I know about viral evolution, and as we are very well connected to China, we knew what was going there, and so we warned everyone, the pedagogical teams, the students, and all the staff of the CRE. So we were relatively well prepared in terms of having online tools that were specifically adapted to the pandemic situation. Plus, so and in a way, a lot of, indeed, we like when people meet, and it's a problem when they cannot meet as much. But we managed to use all sorts of digital tools, including a lot of open source tools, to organize solutions for this. But what we clearly saw is an acceleration of the numbers of people that contacted us, because I tried to warn education ministry, higher education ministry, and so on, of what was coming, and I cannot say that they were completely prepared for it, because it's not enough to warn them. Sometimes you need years of preparation, and they were, but everyone had to adapt. That's very clear, and I think it's reinforced, if anything, the sort of things we were saying in terms of the need to reinvent the whole ecosystem of learning and students' experience.
Yes, and on this point, as you know, before the conference, we sent to the participant a survey to ask them some question. So maybe I will share with you some a synthesis of some of their answers, and you can also react on them and maybe add something to the reflection. So one of the questions we asked to the participant was, what is the best teaching or learning practice you have seen in 2020? And many participants mention digital learning practice. Most of them mention those kind of practice that could help to reproduce in classroom interaction, like the breakout rooms, for example, in Zoom or in other video conference tool. And it's interesting that most of the best practice have been focused on reproducing the in-person interaction online. What do you think about that, and how does the CRE, what is the best teaching or learning practice you have seen in 2020?
Yeah, I think it's the question is, for instance, already with MOOCs, that was the innovation of a few years back. It was mostly digitalizing the amphitheater lecture. But I'm not sure the amphitheater lecture is the most exciting experience that a student has in a university. And I would say, a lot of this, if it's just trying to be a patch, and we understand why it's needed, but I think there is more to be learned, and one of the best way to learn is indeed to give the voice to everyone, which is what you try to do with that questionnaire. But I think asking students, for instance, what they really enjoyed during that period. There is many things that they suffered from, but is there things that they really found interesting? One of the things that I found interesting, for instance, is that many teachers learn from their students. So that's the sort of reverse mentoring on the use of digital tools, for instance, was in itself an interesting perspective. But I think the digital world as lot of things that we miss in terms of the quality of physical interaction, but it has a few qualities that we should try to highlight and maybe benefit from. So for instance, among the things that we've developed at CRE, we have a database of projects that is a digital database of all the project of the students called Projects. So you can find it on our website. Maybe you can put this, David, in the chat. But and we have added on top of this an artificial intelligence that has read already all of Wikipedia and now can read all of the project of the students or the projects of anyone that wants to share them, or actually any text corpus, so any web page, any video to text documents, and so on, and that can help geolocate knowledge that you're interested in, or it can geolocate in that knowledge space your project, and it can compute distances, and it can put two students in contact because they have similar projects, and they might be in the same institutions, or it might be in different institutions in different countries. And so I think that sort of digital technology are a real plus, because suddenly it opens the world. And so it's not just reproducing the classroom in digital format, it's opening the classroom and enabling students to see what's going on in their classroom, but also what's going on in other classrooms, and what's going on in order to do things that are meaningful to them. So I think that's the sort of things which is promising in my view for the future of online learning, because hopefully, we at some point we'll be able to go back to the physical interaction that we all love. But what would be the lessons that we should keep having? And I think some of those are along the lines that I just highlighted. But making a specific list of those things, and inviting every student, every teacher to document, what it is that they would want to see in the future, both during the pandemics and after the pandemics, is probably one of the most interesting things we could do together.
Yes, and a second question we ask the participant is, what is the biggest challenge you currently face in your practice? And most of the answers have focused on the students' fatigue, the students' loss of motivation with this pandemic that continues, the loneliness also of some students. In your opinion, how can we keep and even increase student motivation in the current context?
Well, I mean, I agree. It's one of the major challenges that we all face. And you have to understand what motivation is. Motivation, there is this nice book called Drive by Daniel Pink that's, I guess, some of you have read, that documents motivation and inner motivation, the inner drive for doing things. And basically, it talks about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And the mastery parts, you have to give students things that are at the right level of complexity and adapted to their learning experience and learning abilities, which are different from what they were in the digital world. So that's one. Autonomy, do we give them autonomy, or do we ask them to follow online courses for hours and hours and hours? And autonomy is not what universities do best usually, and I think in the digital world it's sometimes even worse. So that's a problem. And then students may they have the autonomy to do something else, and switch off and do other things. So that's a real issue. The third, maybe most interesting thing is purpose. What is purposeful learning? And there is some research on what is purpose, and it basically leads to three different dimensions. One is creativity. Do you do something creative where you feel engaged because it's something new, versus learning things of the past? The second is, do you do something collectively? And in the confinement period, do you manage to recreate collective? Because that's I think one of the biggest problem. And the third one is to do something that goes beyond yourself, that can benefit others, that there is a positive impact on the world of what you do. And I think that what we have to try to do is to invite our students to learn to care for themselves, which is very difficult in this period. They have to be able to say their emotions. They have to say, what are their main problems. Care for others. It could be, their fellow students. It could be, an elderly person in the neighborhood that they help, or it could be, working on various dimensions that they feel concerned with, and the third one is, what do you do for the planet? And I think the students of today see the pandemic as one symptom of a dysfunctional global world. And they know that there is many other things coming, like climate change and many other challenges, and they want to be engaged on those things. And so, are we inviting them to reflect on those things? Are we empowering them to do so? Are we enabling them to understand the complexity of those issues and enabling them to start? Because if you are faced as an individual with something that is so much bigger than you, you feel like you're no one and that you cannot do anything. And some of them can even feel suicidal. And one of the most stressing remarks I heard on this is a young girl saying, I understand that my best hope for a zero carbon footprint is suicide. And that's terrible. And in fact, there are solutions. And if all those that feel like this were committing suicide, then only Trump and Bolsonaro and their friends would be there, and that's what our psychiatrist told her, and fortunately managed to change her mind. But so I think we have to empower the students, and so that they feel that alone they may not be able to do much, but if they connect to others, then they can have true impact. And it's somewhat the same for the COVID and all the global crisis. Alone you cannot do much, but if you manage to understand what's going on, connect to others, and start doing things that are meaningful, then you can be hopeful again.
On this topic of purpose, François, I know that CRI promotes the concept of Ikigai. Could you tell us a bit more about this Japanese concept and how could it empower students in their learning journey?
Yeah, Ikigai is a very interesting concept that became somewhat viral on the web. So you might have heard some versions of it. It's a concept that is associated, when we translate it into Western words and ideas, into a reason for being or a personal journey. And this reason for being is at the intersection of four big questions, which very often you would see, what it is that I love. But I think it's not only what it is that I love, but what are my emotional bottom that are the most impactful. It could be, what am I afraid of? It could be, what I'm fearing. It could be what I feel outraged with, like Black Lives Matters is a good example, or Me Too, or, so it's not only what you love, it's what drives you, I think. Then it's what the world needs. And it's not only what the world needs, but, also what my community needs. And by the way, what it is that I need, and we rarely ask students to express their inner needs and understand and develop their understanding of their community needs and the global needs, which the United Nations has nicely framed into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that I guess you all know. And then the other circle of the Ikigai is the circle of what am I good at, but it's also, what can I learn, especially if you're a student. It's not only what you're good at today, but what can I become good at tomorrow? And there you have to start navigating in knowledge space and maybe geolocate you with the sort of knowledge GPS I was mentioning before. And then the fourth things, very often it's answered as, what can I be paid for? But I think it's more general than this, is what are the resources I need to thrive? Can I identify, and these resources could be, meeting people. It could be finding technologies. It could be, indeed finding money for myself or finding money for the projects I care about. And but it could also be the resources I can contribute to in the community. And thanks for this drawing, David. And if we start connecting and answering those various questions progressively, I think we can. Again, try to geolocate them, because my Ikigai may be complementary to yours, and the resources I need, maybe you have, or the one you have, maybe I need. And what you learned, maybe I should learn. Maybe we have the same community needs. Maybe we have the same global challenges ahead of us. And so maybe we should build a sort of a Ikigai GPS or a GPS of dreams, to take the quote from John Lennon. He said, I may be a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And so, and with Yoko Ono, they were saying that, if you dream alone, you cannot do much. But if you manage to dream with others, you might be able to change the world into your dream. And I think we have to find our co-dreamers in a way, and people that share enough of the Ikigai so that we can do things together. And I think, there is more and more cases where companies, especially in France, for instance, there is a notion of raison d'être of the company, or the mission statement of the company. And should the mission statement of the individual and the collective of the institution and every person involved in it be aligned? And can we have a conversation about these things? How do we transform ourselves? And what are the Ikigai of universities, for instance? For me, the Ikigai of the CRE is that we have to help others find their Ikigai. So I think we can start having discussions around those things. And for some reason, the questions of purpose are not enough present in the conversations that we have with our students. And I think that's something that end up with a lot of burnout and a lot of people that don't know where to go and may fail into traps of people that are, selling all sorts of manipulations, and that may lead them to fake news or to terrorism or to all sorts of problematics. And so I think it's interesting to have open conversations along those lines more systematically.
Thank you, François. We have some questions in the chat. By the way, invite all the participants to ask your question for François in the chat, even if we already have several answers from the survey. You can react to François' presentation and reflection and ask your own question or contribution. I've seen that many people already shared some contributions, some links, and some questions. And one of the questions that is asked in the chat is interesting because it has been mentioned in the survey as well. It's about mindfulness. So the question is from Audrey, asking if mindfulness is related to Ikigai. And also on the survey, several participants told us that during COVID, they used mindfulness as a tool to connect with their students and to fight against the Zoom fatigue, or to increase just the feeling of connection between students. How do you think mindfulness can help in this context? And how, I know that also at CRE, you have a lot of work regarding mindfulness.
Yeah, we have especially, the work at CRE on mindfulness was started by a young PhD student that is also an MD, and she's trying to teach mindfulness to her fellow students, both at CRE and in the medical faculty, because medical students are faced with tremendous stress. That has always been true, but it's even more true during that period, and you have the stress of having to study, of having to compete with others, and of having to face death and disease and human suffering. And so we have, I think in this period, we have to care for those that care. And which means, we have to care for every one of ourselves so that we can care better for others. But if your profession is to care, then you have to be aware of the limits. No one is a superhero, and that's why it's good that everyone applauds the medical professions. But in the same time, we have to care for them, and we have to help them care for themselves. Because those environments might be super stressful. And so mindfulness is, when you cannot go outside, you go inside. In a way, that's a nice way of summarizing the need to do these sorts of things. Mindfulness is just one of the many ways to go inside, and it happens to be derived from ancient traditions and has more of a scientific twist recently, and it's being studied, and it can be shown to be quite efficient. I'm not sure that's the only one and the only way to do it, and I think we, in a way, again, we have to do sort of a participatory science of how do people cope with the situation, and mindfulness may very well be on the top of the list. But I guess there will be other techniques that may be more adapted to various people, and it would be really interesting to have a distributed list of answers to such questions, and even mindfulness. There is many ways of working on this. So I think doing more of participatory science of how to cope and how to care is something that I think would be very interesting to do collectively.
Thank you, François. Another question we asked in the survey was, how will you transform your practice in 2021 and why? What is interesting is that many participants told us that actually they don't know, and they are still looking for. They know they want to transform their practice, but they don't know how, and they are still looking for best practice and new methods. Some of them, many are looking for ways to interact more with the student and to connect more with the student and to create a sense of community with the students. Active methodology are mentioned, insert more interactive activities. So we always go back to this question of community and of learning community. What do you think about that? How can we create a learning community, and especially a remote learning community?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and I think again you have to have a reason to feel that you're part of a community, and it's not enough to be in the same class or in the same university. But if there is a challenge that we all face, and if we are ready to have meaningful conversation around that challenge, I think it's basically part of the beauty of university life, which has somewhat disappeared with the lockdown, is the ability to chat after the course. To go to a bar, to have a social life, and so on. And a lot of this is gone. But why is the bar interesting? I mean, it's not only because there is alcohol and stuff like this there. It's because we can have very meaningful conversation. It's because we can discover ourselves. It's because we can discover the others. It's because we can, develop and ultimately, at the end of a university life, not only we've learned, what the curricula was supposed to tell us, and this is more or less stable, but we've learned a lot of things about ourselves. And we've learned that, there is communities that we really feel that we belong to, and we want to connect. We might have, created a new love relationship and many other things. And these things are somewhat gone. And so being able to reinvent these dimensions in the digital world is not so easy, but I think there is all sorts of topics for meaningful conversation, for instance, that can be found on the web, and I think that so it's basically finding your own purpose on one side and finding a meaningful conversation on the other side, and the two would reinforce one another. And then if you find people that are really your soulmates in a way, or your ID mates, or your purpose mate, and that's a real community which whom you will have lasting conversations. And then the digital might help you to keep in touch, even though you might be worlds apart, because geography separates us too often. But so I think it's again the ability to I think a meaningful community that you want to belong to, and not just that you are artificially belonging to transiently, is a community that indeed address those issues of what is purpose for the individual and for the collective, and what are our common challenges. Can I say that I'm vulnerable? Can I find support in that community that will help me face those moments where I feel vulnerable? And there is a lot of those in this very moment where we feel vulnerable. I think we've never felt so vulnerable, individually, collectively, and even as a civilization. We probably feel much more vulnerable than ever. But we are not invited to have conversations about these things unless we have deep, intimate relation, and that may not be so easy to do these days. But if you dare address those questions, and if you create safe space for those conversations, then meaningful things might happen.
Thank you, François. You go too fast and mentioned so many resources. I just wanted to put in the chat the TED talk from Brené Brown about the power of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Martin in the chat made a very interesting point about the necessity also to build. Let me go back. There are many questions and comments. Okay. Let me back to William's comment about what are your tips and techniques for creating people interaction, even outside of the class. Maybe do you have you seen like techniques from your students at CRE, where they continue to interact together, or how do they bond together, even apart from the class? You've seen interesting stuff on this aspect.
So that's so I think what we did in at CRE in general is the physical space and the digital space are as co-designed as we can with the students. So we ask them, what it is that you want. So in the physical space, we had an architect and designer students that spent a year discussing with all the students and the staff on our new building. So that was a few years back. And if you come and visit us, you will see that there is a little place to chat everywhere. So as soon as you go outside of a classroom, there is space where you can stick around and discuss with one another for as long as you want. So you don't have to go to a bar, which might be expensive and where you're sort of forced to drink alcohol to stay together. So that's already one dimension. And we try to invite students to get to learn about themselves and about the others on the first week and weeks of the beginning of the year. And so we were fortunate that both last year and this year, the very first weeks of the year were physical. So we managed to create that sense of belonging and personal, deep, meaningful relationship. But we've also invited students to create a network where they are invited to check on each other and keep in touch, and so that no one is left out. And so that's yet another little tip for today. And we've been creating spaces like the mindfulness space or the Ikigai lab, or have discussions, and we have different and the idea is that the various students at CRE create their own clubs, which is basically they find something that they have in common, and whether they want to talk about Ikigai, or they want to talk about gastronomy, or they want to talk about synthetic biology, they can come together, and we even have a little budget for them to invite people, buy equipment, and do meaningful things with this, including maybe buying food and drinks so that they can live together and do things together. So I think it's very important to in fact empower them, where you empower the individuals through the collective that they build collectively.
On that aspect of communities, obviously we see the value of a student getting together when they share the same cause. But in those times, whereas one participant mentioned where we lost our ability to talk with each other, especially when we are different, there is a question. Do you think there is a risk of students search only relationship with communities having the same mindset and values? And is there not a risk that it will reinforce their fears and vulnerability towards other communities they don't try to understand? How can we help students and learners to continue interacting with each other even when they don't share the same opinion or values or personalities or goals?
Yeah, it's a very good and important question. And indeed, you know, the digital technologies of today tend to reinforce these bubbles where people are feeding on each other's fears and anxieties and so on. I think that there is an interesting, talking about tips to build a relationship, there is an interesting approach that you might find if you look for 36 questions to fall in love. But the guy that developed those 36 questions that, you know, became somewhat viral after a New York Times editor reported on it after having fallen in love using this. So that I talked to that scientist that has done this 50 years back and has a long history of this. In fact, these 36 questions, you can use them to have meaningful conversations with anyone. So for instance, you use it with, you know, young Black people and white police officer, okay, which are two communities that, you know, tend to fight rather than to connect. And it works as well, okay? And if you randomly assort people at the beginning of the year, and they did this in his university in the US, you start connecting with people you didn't know, and you discover that in fact you have much more in common with people that are of a different ethnic group or a different gender or a different mindset and culture than you would have imagined. And you discover the beauty of connecting to someone different. And I think that's one way of doing this. But I think in general, we have to try to encourage people that to meet differences and to understand that there is so many ways we look at the world that are complementary but we might fight, but if we go deep enough on our basic roots, you know, for instance, one of the books I recommend is this book of Jonathan Haidt called The Righteous Mind. And this is a book where, you know, Jonathan explains that we have different values, but they are all falling into a few categories. And we feel that we are so different, but in fact, if you go deep enough, we're not that different. So the 6 values that are core and that are universal are, the first one is care. And it links to vulnerability, to the fact that we're all born vulnerable. You know, there is no way as a mammal we could survive without, you know, someone caring for us from birth on. And so that's very deep and biological. The second is, as we are social animals, it's fairness. And we look for things that are fair. And when you see something unfair, you feel outraged and you want to do something about it very often. And the third thing, which is somewhat controversial, is freedom. It's somewhat controversial because, you know, where freedom starts, where it ends, you know, the freedom to move has been stopped with lockdown. So we see that freedom is something that varies a lot in space and time and in cultures, and with age as well. You know, a 5-year-old doesn't have the same freedom as a 15-year-old and 25-year-old. And then there is the notion of, there is 3 notions that are coming very often together and where people often fight, which is community, authority, and sacredness. Okay, so what is your community? Do you belong to only one community and no other? Or do you realize that, in fact, we belong to many communities? You know, you belong to maybe your tribe, but maybe also to, you know, people that love soccer, and maybe people that, you know, are afraid of climate change, and maybe people that, you know, have many other dimensions. And so, in fact, we don't belong to only one community, but to communities. And so that sense, I think, is important to discuss. The second one is authority. And authority, what makes authority is complicated, and different traditions have different answers to this, but we should at least discuss this. For instance, the French philosopher Michel Serres says that authority is what helps you to grow. Donald Trump has a different notions of authority, and some religious leader might have yet another definition. And scientists will say, authority, scientific authority is something that is dynamical and evolves. So you have different definitions on this, but at least being aware of the fact that there are different definitions and that we may or may not agree on what's the most meaningful form of authority. And then sacredness is maybe, for non-religious people, especially in France, a word that is not so easy to deal with. But in fact, it's linked to what you're ready to sacrifice for. For instance, are you ready to sacrifice for your own children? Are you ready to sacrifice for a book, or for a flag, or for a nation, or for values? And what are you ready to sacrifice? Is it just time? Is it your life? You can have meaningful conversations along those things, and progressively discover that we have these multiple dimensions, and we may not agree on everything, but we might be able to agree that those 6 dimensions, for instance, are universal, and we might learn that there is different ways of looking at each of those dimensions that are meaningful to each of us.
It's a perfect transition to the last question we asked in the survey to our participants. This question was, how could higher education inspire and empower students to tackle the SDGs? So we had many answers from the participants, many great ideas, and many examples of initiatives in their universities to involve students in such a big task, and to involve them in challenge-based pedagogy to try to tackle the SDG. Can you share with us how you do it at the CRE, and how do you think higher education could reach that goal?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think the UN has provided us with a framework with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and it's important to understand their relationship, to understand what are the 17 and why they're connected. Why, for instance, if you want to have a biocarburant, you can create more problems in terms of food security, or in terms of biodiversity, and so on. So I think, or you may want to understand that if you want to improve education, you have to understand gender issues, and you have to understand poverty issues, and you have to understand health issues. But if you do improve education, you will have progress on gender and on health and on poverty and so on. So I think it's quite important to be introduced to this complexity, and then to understand that various disciplines shed different lights on these things, and so you can have students and faculties of different disciplines that come together to discuss this, and especially very quickly you can decide that there is a challenge that you really care about, that you really would like to address. And what's also interesting with the SDGs is that there are global challenges, but they all have local dimensions. And so you can start local. So you can, in a way, think fractal and act viral. You can think about the various dimensions, but in your local solution, you can look at others' local solution that might be inspiring for you. And whenever you have done something, you can share it so that it may become viral, because other people might be able to use it to do something. And this way, you don't feel alone in this facing those global challenges and their complexity, but you start feeling that there is a whole community, or actually communities, that are addressing those issues, and you may want to connect to people addressing similar issues at the other side of the world and learn from them, and start to see what it is that we can do together that we could not do alone. And so I think it's this. These pedagogies for SDGs are basically using the scientific method, using the power of different disciplines, using the power of data to understand the issues, using the power of open science and open data and open source tools, open hardware, open software. And I think, progressively you start feeling that you're part of, a never-growing community of change maker. and that indeed the collective may be able to change the issues at stake. And I think that's quite powerful and empowering for the students to feel like this, but also for the teachers and the faculty, because there is, for instance, in the Learning Planet network, we had a lot of community leaders and faculties that started to realize that in fact they were not alone. So it's not only your students are not alone; it's you as a faculty member and as a researcher and as a community leader. You can connect to others, learn from each other, and so in a way, it's that's why I talk about fractal. It's multidimensional, and we have to have attitudes, and the way we train our students, the way we train our faculty, should all be in line, and they should learn from each other, and including new ways of mentoring and reverse mentoring that can be very powerful in that context.
And can you maybe tell us a bit more about Learning Planet, and maybe give us some examples of exemplary learning communities or initiatives that are particularly interesting and inspiring for you?
Yeah, with pleasure. So Learning Planet was launched with UNESCO after we wrote this report that we're mentioning on Learning Society, some of which are available in English. And by the way, the book Learning in 21st Century was also translated in English. You can find it on our website. And I think there is a lot of things that we realize is that there is learning communities at all scales. And a learning community is a community where we are learning from one another, but we're also collectively thinking about what it is that we can do to learn better, individually and collectively. And so it's a reflexivity attitude. And being reflexive is the best way to learn as an individual. It's also the best way to learn as a community. And so one of the things that we do to increase this reflexivity is to invite people to celebrate their learning. So we organize a Learning Planet festival. So if you look for the hashtag Learning Planet, you will find many things on social networks, on YouTube, and so on. We had hundreds of speakers celebrating. We had thousands of young people doing it. We had even more people attending all this. And this is just the beginning. And the idea is we are hacking the International Day of Education that's just been created on January 24. And we are inviting everyone that wants to join every January. But of course, you can celebrate throughout the year. You can celebrate every day what you've learned. And you can celebrate what you've learned as an individual, as a community, as an organization, as a local community, or as a national or global community. And so we're trying to encourage all this in the Learning Planet. For instance, one of the things that was fun is we invited every children that wanted to write to the Little Prince. When they were under lockdown, if they had a conversation with the Little Prince, what would they be talking about? So that was one initiative. A big initiative that I really enjoy that exists for many years now is called Design for Change. And it was started in India. It became viral. Kiran Serbeti, that is launching this, talk about the I Can virus. She wants to spread that virus of empowerment in communities. So she put everything in open source. And it's very simple. It's students are invited to feel, what their emotions are and what they're concerned with in things that they see around them. They are invited to imagine a solution. They are invited to do something about it and then to share what they've done. So it's called FIDS, feel, imagine, do, share. It's easy to remember and it's easy to implement. You can do it even in kindergarten. You can do it in a university. You can do it at every age, and you can connect. The ICANN Design for Change community was invited to the Vatican. So, for instance, to celebrate what they were doing, because the Pope is one of the person that feel that we have to empower the youth and change our attitude to ecology and so on. So I think it's interesting to see these sorts of grassroots initiatives. Another initiative I love is in IT. The Lego Foundation has said that the best school in the world is in Haiti. That looks so improbable, that I took the time to look, and I get to know Guy Etienne, that is the leader of that school, and he's doing amazing work, and he's basically at every age inviting the learners to define their most important challenge and to work on them. And when you do this throughout your education, you end up being able to do amazing things, including winning awards at international science Olympiads and these sorts of things, even though you started from an environment that is not the easiest one in the world.
And about learning and celebrating your learning, could you share with us what was your greatest learning of this past year?
Maybe it's the understanding that we are so vulnerable at all scale. There is a saying of Confucius that I knew before, but I sort of felt very deeply this year. Confucius said, we have two lives, and our second life starts when we know we have only one. And when I had to close the CRE because of lockdown, I knew that it would come, and yet I went on the rooftop where we have a beautiful view, and I could see Notre Dame from there burning sometime before, and I realized that if even Notre Dame can collapse, I was in Wall Street in New York on September 11th, and I saw also the tower collapse. So towers can collapse, Notre Dame can collapse, or individual lives can collapse, and our society can collapse. And when we saw, what was happening at Capitol, for instance, democracy can collapse very quickly. So things that we really care about, we have to care for. And so that sense of vulnerability of the individual and the collective, of the institutions and the civilization and so on, and our whole biosphere, all this is very vulnerable. And so, and once we know how vulnerable we are, as Confucius say, a second life starts. So maybe we have, now that we know how vulnerable we are, maybe we should be much more reflexive and much more caring. And really being able to do that. And I think ever more people are realizing this. And if all those that realize this come together, maybe they can rethink the very fundamentals of the way we interact. And I also took the time to reread about Athenian democracy and Athenian Pericles century, where they invented democracy, science, education, philosophy, debate, the agora, and the possibility to exchange goods and ideas in one place. It was not a perfect world because women were out of this, slaves were out of this, poor were out of this, migrants were out of this. The Enlightenment reinvented more or less the same things, but in the meantime, they did it at a national scale because they were using printing to spread ideas, and there was this invisible college connecting so many people, and all sorts of circles reinventing rights and human rights and so on. But they were, men's rights. They were not women's rights. They were not children's rights. They were not universal as we would like them to be today. But I think today we have to reinvent this whole package of the Enlightenment and of Athens in the digital world. And we shouldn't think of just local or national citizenship. We should think about fractal citizenship, of a citizenship that includes all those local and national dimensions, but also the global dimension. And you may feel as a global citizen, but none of us has the power of a global citizen in the way we have the power of a local citizen. We cannot vote for anything that happens on the global scale. And yet, some of our major issues today are global. And, you don't have to know about game theory to realize that, unless we collaborate on a global scale, we will collapse. And so and what is the best way to collaborate at a global scale if it's not democracy and open debates, science-based and so on. So I think we have to reinvent, science, education, democracy, and philosophy and debates. But at the moment, what I also learned this year is that if you look at the social dilemma on Netflix, you will see that the artificial intelligence has been designed to maximize the money made by social networks, and that goes through spreading fake news, because they actually make more money spreading fake news. And if you look at this, you will understand why. And so we have to redesign artificial intelligence and all technology and global ecosystem so that we are inviting everyone to flourish individually and collectively, and we are aware of the limits of our current civilization, where we actually, our competitive system, we compete with one another, and we forget to think about our own emotions. We forget to think about others' emotions. We are not connecting to ourselves. We're not connected to others. We're not connecting to nature, and we exploit ourselves. We exploit others. We exploit nature, and we have to, make sense of that and realize that we have to have a deep change. And that deep change goes through reconnecting to ourselves, reconnecting to others, reconnecting to nature, caring for oneself, caring for others, caring for nature, and that's, I think needs a sort of a cultural change. Because many of us are good at competing, and that we know from biology and from philosophy and from cognitive science and developmental science and so on, that in fact young children are very good at cooperating, and we care for each other naturally. Okay, we've evolved in small communities caring for each other, and that's very nice, because we have this innate tendency to do this, but we have to scale them. And our circle of caring should progressively expand, and that's where mindfulness and other methods can invite us to progressively reconnect to all those dimensions, from the self to the others to the world. And but I think that's what I learned this year, and I learned that we can try to collectively to make a difference, but it will be a long journey. But we talk about the Pericles century, we talk about the Enlightenment century, and I think we need a sort of a new global enlightenment that would be much more inclusive, much more democratic, because the first ones forgot the women, forgot the children, forgot the slave. And one of the things I learned also this year, which I think is worth sharing, is there is a UNICEF WHO report on children's health. And basically they say that unless we take the children's perspective and the future generations' perspective, our planet will fail. And we have to redesign their rights in order to be able to redesign our world. And when you think that children are not citizens, there is no country where their voice are truly heard when we talk about, say, climate change, or we talk about education, the things that directly concern them and will concern them for the years to come. And so I think we have to redesign democracy in a fractal way, starting with the youngest ones and giving them a voice and giving learners a voice. I think is my best hope for our future.
Maybe to conclude and to go back to our role as educators, in your opinion, what are the most important questions we should ask ourselves and try to answer in 2021 and in the years to come?
Well, it's basically what do we take of the past, and I think we have to reflect on past, present, and future, individually and collectively. And so what it is from the past that we really want to keep, what it is in the present that is interesting and what is frightening, and what sort of future we want to build. Strangely enough, we are not asking ourselves those questions very often, and certainly not in ways that are including collective intelligence at all scales. And I think that we really have to try to do. And I think every discipline has something to bring to that conversation. There is a saying in Japan that I like that says, none of us is more intelligent than all of us. And I think, contrary to what some French philosopher of 19th century were saying, there is no discipline that is superior to others. And all disciplines have to shed some lights on those complex issues. But we have to be ready to think out of the box, out of our disciplinary silos, if we want to make a difference. And we have to be ready to ask, meaningful questions. Is the competitions among faculty the best way to have faculty do what is the best for them individually and for their students and for society? Again, competition has its own virtues, but it has its own drawbacks. And so how do we learn to cooperate much better across disciplines, within disciplines? I think it's for me, universities should be the labs of the future, because we have the youth with us. We have the various disciplines with us. We have the various scientific methods with us. And so we could do so much, but in fact, we do so little because we are, trapped in our personal little priorities. And I think that won't work in the long run. But the good news is that I know many places that have started to do this. And it happens in Finland, it happens in Taiwan, it happens in Canada, it happens in France, it happens across the world. And so I'm somewhat hopeful, but I try to work on speeding up that transition, because we have to transition from competing for yesterday's knowledge and go to cooperating on today's challenge to build the world of tomorrow.
Thank you, François. Thank you so much. We got a lot of positive reaction in the chat and positive feedback. It has been very inspiring and motivating. So thank you so much. I will let the floor to Sylvie.
Thank you very much, François. Thank you very much, David. It was very stimulating, and there were a lot of interactions between participants. Thank you very much. And now.